Coming up, Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers headline the weekend of games in week 3. This is Locked On Game to Game NFL.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NFL, local experts taking us from game to game in week 3 of the NFL season. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. The Chicago Bears are coming off their latest beating from Aaron Rodgers, but they hope to bounce back in a home matchup that Chicago is actually favored in. Locked On Bears tells us what Chicago needs to do to stay above 500 this weekend.
The Chicago Bears need to open up their passing game to balance the ground attack if they want to beat the Houston Texans on Sunday. I'm Lauren Cox from the Locked On Bears podcast, and we've seen now the Bears have success getting David Montgomery going in the ground game, but everyone's talking about how few pass attempts Justin Fields has had this season. I think some of the trust questions are a little bit overblown, but the Bears do need to throw the ball more to win these types of football games. I think they're going to be able to run the ball effectively against the Houston Texans, and they're going to be tempted to try and stick with that throughout the ball game, but you have to open things up a little bit more with some more play action shots downfield and get a little bit less conservative on some screen passes and some underneath dump-offs just to try and fight to live another down. For more breakdowns of this upcoming Bears-Texans matchup, you can find the Locked On Bears podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The Eagles and Commanders will meet for the first time this season in Washington on Sunday. Philly looks like it could be one of the best teams in the league after beating up on the Vikings Monday night. But our Locked On Commanders host gives the roadmap to Washington, hopefully pulling off the upset.
Hey everyone, it's Chris Russell here from the Locked On Commanders podcast. The keys to victory for a Week 3 matchup at FedEx Field on Sunday against the 2-0 Philadelphia Eagles, very simple to me. It's the turnover game. It's probably that way for every NFL game, every football game, period, but even more so this particular week. The Commanders have turned the ball over 4 times in 2 weeks, including Carson Wentz, who's going against his former team. 3 interceptions so far, despite all of the accolades and the positivity about the offense. And the Commanders' defense has only forced and generated 1 takeaway. They're going to have to win the takeaway battle, I'm thinking 3+, in order for them to win Sunday at FedEx Field. Watch the full length Locked On Commanders podcast with David Harrison and myself. I'm Chris Russell for Locked On Now.
In another divisional game, the Saints and Panthers will both try to keep up with Tampa in the NFC South on Sunday, but only one team will get that crucial divisional win. Locked On Saints and Panthers tell you why it will be their team on top at the end.
Hailing from a city known for its music, you wouldn't expect it, but if the New Orleans Saints are going to win in Week 3, they still need to find their rhythm. I'm Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast. If the New Orleans Saints won a second line out of Charlotte going up against the Carolina Panthers with a W this weekend, they're going to need to figure out how to march to their own drum, how to play the songs that they know, how to find their rhythm, establish it early, and build their identity off of it for a full 60 minutes. The New Orleans Saints offense in particular has struggled to find its kind of groove and figure out what it is that this team is going to build itself around. Alvin Kamara hopefully being able to come back this weekend would be a huge boost for the New Orleans Saints, but even with quarterback Jameis Winston playing with 4 fractures in his back, it's another huge storyline that you're going to be following all throughout here that could end up impacting the New Orleans Saints' ability to not only establish their rhythm in this game, but figure out what instruments they're playing all throughout the rest of the season as well. So if you want more on this New Orleans Saints matchup against the Carolina Panthers, and of course everything else around your beloved New Orleans Saints, make sure you're following along on the Locked On Saints podcast, free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Coming up, who will win the battle of Hall of Fame quarterbacks this weekend? This is Locked On Game to Game NFL. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by Brightco. I know we all kind of hate insurance, but it's a necessary evil sometimes, especially when it comes to insuring your jewelry. I know I've misplaced my wedding rings before, and that's never fun trying to look for that. Brightco makes it super simple. It's easy to set up. It's just $5 a month. You get totally comprehensive coverage, and it won't take you more than a couple of minutes to set up on your cell phone. Check it out at bright.co/locked on. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NFL. I'm Kainani Stevens, and thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. In the NFC West, both the Los Angeles Rams and the Arizona Cardinals are coming off big wins last week, but both also lost in week one. Two playoff teams from last season that are 1-1 will look to avoid going 1-2 early in the season. Locked On Rams and Cardinals have the keys to victory.
The Los Angeles Rams need to take care of the football on Sunday against the Arizona Cardinals if we are going to have a good Monday. My name is Travis Rogers, host of the Locked On Rams podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here's the deal. When the Rams take care of the football, they almost never lose. Matthew Stafford has only had 8 games in his career where he has not thrown an interception as a member of the Los Angeles Rams. You know what their record is in those 8 games? 8-0. Everything else, 1, they got a pretty good chance. Anything more than 1, all bets are off. And so far through this season, he has thrown 5 interceptions in just the first 2 games of the season. You're going to have to clean that up all over the place if they're going to find a way to beat the Arizona Cardinals on Monday. For more on your Los Angeles Rams and this weekend's big matchup, be sure to check out the Locked On Rams podcast every Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Cliff Kingsbury needs to outthink Sean McVay. I'm Alex Clancy with Locked On Cardinals. For the Cardinals to have a victory this weekend against the Los Angeles Rams, Cliff Kingsbury needs to put together the perfect offensive game plan. Sean McVay has had the Cardinals' number, aside from an early victory in 2021 by the Arizona Cardinals, although in convincing fashion. The Los Angeles Rams and Sean McVay have had the Cardinals' number since McVay took over as head coach. The last time we saw the Cardinals and Rams was a game the Cardinals fans want to forget in the playoffs last season. Cliff Kingsbury needs to put together a perfect offensive game plan for Kyler Murray to execute. The defense cannot save the day every week like they did last week, giving the Cardinals the opportunity for a comeback against the Raiders, which they executed. Kyler Murray needs to be special. Cliff Kingsbury needs to put Kyler Murray in a position to be special. I'm Alex Clancy with Locked On Cardinals. For all the Arizona Cardinals news you could eat, check me out, free and available wherever you get your podcast, Monday through Friday on Locked On Cardinals and on YouTube.
Seattle Seahawks are going to try to stay above 500, maybe even have a better record than Russell Wilson by the end of the week. But the Atlanta Falcons, of course, have other plans. Locked On Falcons gives you the game plan for Atlanta.
The Atlanta Falcons must be opportunistic with turnovers to beat the Seattle Seahawks in Week 3. I'm Aaron Freeman, host of Locked On Falcons. You can expect a tight, competitive game for the Falcons on the road in Seattle in Week 3 that probably will go down to the final possession, as most NFL games do. And the deciding factor in the final score could be turnovers. Both the Falcons and Seahawks have turned the ball over 4 times so far this year, with both teams having turnovers in Week 2 losses to the Rams and 49ers respectively that led to costly points for their opponent. That could again be the case in their Week 3 matchup, with either team looking to capitalize as much as possible on any mistakes made by the other team in a critical moment that could be the deciding factor for the outcome of this game. For more coverage of the Atlanta Falcons, check out Locked On Falcons, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts, your team every day.
2 Hall of Famers are going to face off this weekend when the Buccaneers take on the Packers. Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady sure to provide some fireworks, and it will be a good watch, no doubt. Locked On Buccaneers and Locked On Packers are getting their popcorn ready for this one.
James Yarko here from the Locked On Bucs podcast, talking about the Buccaneers' key to victory this week as they host the Green Bay Packers in their home opener. And it's all about the defense. Tom Brady has had issues early on this season getting the ball to his playmakers, and now his playmakers have been depleted even more with the suspension of Mike Evans being upheld. But the Buccaneers defense, who is first in the NFL in scoring, allowing just 6.5 points per game, allowing just 1 touchdown so far on the season. They're second in takeaways with 6. They have the most team sacks in the NFL with 10, and they are 8th in the NFL in passing defense, allowing 189.5 yards per game. It's all about this defense making Aaron Rodgers uncomfortable. Shaq Barrett has caused Aaron Rodgers problems in the past. Jamel Dean has caused Aaron Rodgers problems in the past, and Rodgers flat out does not have great luck against this Buccaneers team, losing 3 of 5 matchups, and 2 of which were in Tampa. He's lost both Brady era Buccaneers matchups, one of which was in Tampa, the other, of course, being in the NFC Championship. The Bucs defense was able to get a lot of pressure on Rodgers in those games, cause some mistakes, cause some frustrations, and set up 3rd and long situations, helping to keep the Packers out of the end zone. That's going to be a big point for the Buccaneers this week as they look to shut down Rodgers and star running back Aaron Jones, who many believe the Packers are going to rely upon heavily. For more on this and all things Tampa Bay Buccaneers, check out my co-host David Harrison and I on the Locked On Bucs podcast 5 days a week, free and available on all platforms here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Run the football. It is something the Green Bay Packers have not had to do to win really in the Aaron Rodgers era. That right now is not true for the Green Bay Packers, especially this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm Peter Bukowski, host of Locked On Packers, and the last time the Packers played the Bucs, the Tampa Bay run defense was the proverbial immovable object. Teams just gave up. They didn't even try to run against that 2020 Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, but this team is 15th in run defense DVOA through 2 weeks and has been looking a little bit more vulnerable. No Akeem Hicks this weekend, and reportedly for the next month, the Packers only have to worry about what's happening on Sunday, and they're coming off 2 games where this run game was absolutely dominant, including a game against the Bears in which Aaron Jones had an 8-yard run that actually reduced his yard per carry average. He has been lights out to start the season, and the Packers have made an effort to get him more involved. If they can run the ball on Sunday and stay out of those 3rd and long situations when Todd Bowles can get exotic with those blitz looks, and they're going to play tight man coverage on a group of receivers that has not proven itself, that is a situation the Packers are going to want to avoid. So run the ball effectively, run it in a variety of ways, which we've seen them do, one of the most varied and creative run games in the league so far this season, and give your offense a chance to convert on 2nd down. And if you need to get to 3rd down, convert some 3rd and shorts. Stay out of those long down and distances and take advantage of a defense that is not what it once was, even if it is still very good overall.
Monday Night Football features an NFC East rivalry with the surprisingly undefeated New York Giants hosting the Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys and Giants preview the week's finale.
The Dallas Cowboys are going to need to play complementary football if they are going to beat the New York Giants and remain in the race for the NFC East. Hi, I'm Landon McCool with the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and last Sunday against Cincinnati, the Cowboys were able to pull an upset against the Bengals by having their defense and special teams buoy the performance of their offense. The Cowboys, without Dak Prescott for at least a couple more weeks, are going to need to continue these kind of performances if they want to remain in this race and remain relevant in the NFC East. This last drive, the game-winning field goal that the Cowboys got to win the game against Cincinnati was set up by a great stand by the defense at the very end of the game. The Cowboys offense was able to get a couple first downs, and then obviously Brett Maher's 50-yard field goal for the win was ultimately the ender. The Cowboys are going to need that kind of level of performance from both their defense and their special teams in order to survive the remaining time with Dak on the sideline. And with several division games in between now and then, they are going to need those performances to continue starting this week against the New York Giants. For more on the Dallas Cowboys, make sure you check us out on the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and make sure you check out all podcasts on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The New York Giants are looking to move to 3-0 Monday night when they host the 1-1 Dallas Cowboys at MetLife Stadium. What do the Giants need to do to find success? Hi, everybody. Patricia Traynor reporting. And the New York Giants have won their last 2 games by 1 and 3 points, respectively, games in which they've either been behind or tied by the half. A big reason for this has been the slow starts on offense. The Giants have been outscored 19-7 by opponents in the first 30 minutes of play this season. And it goes without saying that against a Cowboys team that has outscored its opposition 20-15 in that same period, the Giants are going to need to start faster. So how does New York do that? I asked head coach Brian Dable, and while he didn't acknowledge specific solutions that the team might be considering, he did say, quote, "That's an important part of the game for us, is trying to get off to a fast start. That doesn't always happen. We'll continue to work at that and put together some good openers," end quote. The Giants are 25-41-1 on Monday Night Football and 9-13 on Monday Night Football at home. The task won't be easy, but if the Giants can keep the train rolling, it'll be their best start to a season since 2009, when they went 5-0 to start that campaign. For more on the New York Giants, keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
That's all for today on Locked On Game to Game NFL. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts to Locked On NFL. And of course, check out your team's Locked On podcast as well. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.